We'll be having our second poster session followed by the fourth keynote talk with Dr. Egidio D'Angelo from University of Pavia, Italy. Then our third poster session, and at the last, the cultural program in the evening. So without wasting any further time, let's begin with our session. Now, I would like to call Mr. Nutaki Chaitanya Kumar for chairing the session and Ms. Alti Rajendran to co-chair from Amrita Mindran Center.
Thank you, Mahima. Once again, welcome to the poster session. Today, we'll have two poster sessions. One from 2 p.m. to 2:45 p.m. followed by a keynote lecture. And next, we'll have 4:30 to 5:15 p.m. We have the poster session of one more poster session followed by a question and answer session where we request all the presenters to be online available for the question answer session. So for today, the presentation is modulatory effects of hand presence on temporal judgments by Krishnapriya KS and Tony Thomas.
Hello, I'm Krishnapriya KS from the Center for Neural and Cognitive Sciences, University of Hyderabad. The work I'm going to present here have been done under the guidance of Dr. Tony Thomas, Assistant Professor of Psychology in IIT Roorkee. So, we already know that there is a relationship between the attention and time perception. Like there are studies showing prolonged attentional engagement can lead to subjective expansion of the experience of time. There are also some studies stating just the contrary, that there can be a contraction in the subjective experience of time as well. Since attention has a role in judging the temporal duration, our motivation was to know how the presence of stimuli in the perihand space would modulate the temporal acuity, because there are also studies showing there is processing difference of stimuli in perihand space, that is reachable space compared with the space out of that. So there are also studies showing slower disengagement when stimuli is presented near the perihand space. Also, in perihand space, visual processing happens through the M pathway, which is the magnocellular pathway, other than the P pathway. And so if it's mediated through the M pathway, then from previous studies, it has been shown that there is an enhanced temporal acuity in the perihand space. So taking both of these as the motivation for our study, we wanted to know, will there be any modulatory effects in the temporal judgment made for stimuli presented in the perihand space? So our experiment consisted of two conditions, which was the near hand condition and far hand condition. Also the stimulus type consisted of two squares which were presented sequentially that could differ in their size as well as border luminances, and also duration, which was all conforming to the ratio of 1:1.25. So this was a trial structure in which, in the size condition, comparatively smaller square when presented with smaller duration as well as larger square when presented with larger duration was considered as the congruent condition, and in contrast, when the larger square was presented for shorter duration and smaller square when presented for longer duration, it was considered as the incongruent condition. And the same situation goes with the luminance also. Only the luminant value changes if the square with small luminant value when presented for shorter duration as well as large luminant value presented with larger duration were considered as the congruent condition, and incongruent condition just the same as the size stimulus we have already said. So there have been 15 participants volunteered for this study, and as an analysis we have done a 2x2 repeated measure ANOVA performed on congruence as well as hand condition, and as the results obtained, we have observed significant main effect for hand conditions as well as congruent conditions. There were only fewer temporal judgment errors committed in the presence of hand, as well as there was only like overall lesser judgment errors in congruent condition than incongruent condition. So there was actually better temporal judgment made for size and luminance stimulus types in the presence of hand. The overall reduced temporal judgment error in the presence of hand seemed to be a protraction of the previous finding of enhanced temporal acuity in perihand space mediated by the magnocellular pathway. There can also be like bottom-up factors such as task difficulty or inconsistency. Here in our experiment, it was the incongruent condition contributing to the hand-related effects. There was also top-down factors such as expectations or increased certainty. Like in our experiment, it was congruent condition, tend to drown out the hand-related effects. So as a conclusion, we can say that the study bolsters the possibility of perihand effects to extend beyond perception and attention and to other cognitive domains such as time perception. The present work attempts to make connection between the subjective experience of time and other perceptual cognitive processes with the hope of stimulating cross-disciplinary empirical work and theoretical integration. So that was our study. For further, if you have any further doubts or need any clarifications, you can join the link given. Thank you.
Thank you, Krishna Priya. We request all the presenters to be online during the question answer session. And next we have a presentation on effect of hydroalcoholic extract of Centella asiatica on 3-nitropropionic acid induced Huntington-like symptoms in adult zebrafish by Vishal Kumar.
Hello everyone, this is Vishal Kumar, currently working as a Junior Research Fellow in Division of Neuroscience, Department of Pharmacology, ISAF College of Pharmacy, Moga, Punjab. Here is my M.Pharm research work, that is the effect of hydroalcoholic extract of Centella asiatica on 3-nitropropionic acid induced Huntington's-like symptoms in adult zebrafish. Huntington disease is described that it is an inherited neurodegenerative disease characterized by the increasing the paternal muscle movement. Okay. Here is my rationale with this study is to 3-NP reversibly inhibit the STH activity and promote the ROS production, which ultimately leads to the cell death, while HSCA prevent the production of ROS and cell death. Materials method we have used adult zebrafish 3-NP as a neurotoxin, HSCA as a drug. Okay, this is study design. The 3-NP were administered at a dose of 5 mg per kg through IP on average 4 days after 29 days, while HSA given daily with the help of water tank. The behavioral parameters were performed daily up to 28 days on every 4 days before the every injection of 3-NP, and on 29th days, animal was sacrificed, and the brain sample were separated out and preserved for the inflammatory biochemical and histopathological examinations. Now, these are the results of my study. We have performed noble diving tank test, light and dark tank test, and biochemical parameters. In figure 1a, the 3-NP treated group significantly reduced the time spent in top zone as compared to normal group, while HSC low and high dose treated group significantly increased the time spent in top zone as compared to 3-NP treated group. In figure 2b, 3-NP treated group significantly increased the time spent in bottom zone as compared to normal group, while HSC low and high dose treated group significantly decreased the time spent in bottom zone as compared to 3-NP treated group. Okay, the number of entries has decreased in a 3-NP treated group as compared to normal group, while HSC low and high dose treated group significantly increased the number of entries in a top zone as compared to 3-NP treated group. In figure 2b, the time spent in light zone is decreased in a 3-NP treated group as compared to normal group, while HSC low and high dose treated group significantly increased the time spent in light zone as compared to 3-NP treated group. In figure 2b, 3-NP treated group significantly increased the time spent in dark zone as compared to normal group, while HSC low and high dose treated group significantly reduced the time spent in a dark zone as compared to 3-NP treated group. The number of entries in a 3-NP treated group significantly decreased as compared to normal group, while HSC low and high dose treated group significantly increased the number of entries in a top zone in a light zone as compared to 3-NP treated group. And these are the results of biochemical analysis. 3-NP treated group significantly increased the level of LPU and cell cholinesterase as compared to normal group, while HSC low and high dose treated group significantly reduced the level of LPU and cell cholinesterase as compared to 3-NP treated group. While in figure 3b, it is a result of GSH. 3-NP treated group significantly reduced the level of GSH as compared to normal group, while HSC low and high dose treated group significantly increased the level of GSH as compared to 3-NP treated group. And these are the histopathological examination. The normal group shows undamaged neuron, that is in a round shape, while the red arrow in a 3-NP treated group shows damaged neuron, that is flat or means altered the shape, while HSC low and high dose treated group shows undamaged neuron or prevention of damaged neurons from the 3-NP. Discussion: 3-NP significantly reduced body weight, behavioral alteration, oxidative stress, neuroinflammation, neuronal damage, while HCA prevents the 3NP-induced body weight reduction, body weight, behavioral alteration, neuroinflammation, and neuronal damage. Conclusion: HCA at a low dose 10 and high dose 20 mg per liter significantly reverse 3NP-induced behavioral alteration, while HCA-treated group shows significant decrease 3NP-induced increased level of LQ and acetylcholinesterase and increase the level of antioxidant enzyme. Thank you. If you have any query, please ask.
Thank you, Vishal. Now we have a presentation on cross-cultural evaluation of erotic and gory images of International Affective Picture System on an Indian sample by Surabhi Lodha and Rashmi Gupta.
Good afternoon. My name is Surabhi Lodha and I am here today to present my work titled Cross-Cultural Evaluation of Erotic and Gory Pictures of International Affective Picture System or IF on an Indian sample. International Affective Picture System is a standardized tool composed of emotionally evocative colored pictures which are internationally accessible and frequently used in emotion and attention research worldwide. The latest version of IF is composed of 1194 pictures which are being rated along 3 dimensions, namely valence, arousal, and dominance. The previous cross-cultural validation studies have observed consistency in valence ratings, but there were differences in arousal and dominance dimensions. So far, no data on Indian population is available for erotic and gory category of IF pictures. A previous validation study by Lohani et al. In 2013 excluded these categories due to their cultural sensitivities. The Chinese IF validation studies have observed different affective reactions of Chinese and American adults. More importantly, there were differences in emotional responses for high arousing positive and negative pictures across different studies. Keeping these points in mind, we aim to compare self-reported Indian ratings with normative North American ratings and to obtain a standardized set of erotic and gory pictures for use in studies across India. The experiment was designed using Psychopipe 3 and 60 participants, out of which 31 were male, participated in the study. The participants rated 72 pictures which were arousal matched on 3 dimensions using the self-assessment mannequin, which is a graphical 9-point scale. The results. First, comparison of mean ratings showed that for all the 72 pictures, there was similarity in valence ratings, but there were differences along arousal and dominance dimensions. For erotic and gory pictures separately, we observed differences along all the 3 dimensions. The correlational analysis showed that the association between Indian and North American sample were highest for valence, followed by dominance and arousal. The correlation for valence and arousal for the Indian sample showed that pictures rated as highly pleasant or unpleasant were rated as more arousing. But the North American sample showed that the pictures rated as highly pleasant were rated as more arousing. This trend was not observed for erotic pictures. The results of regression analysis showed boomerang shape distribution as has been observed in previous validation studies. However, this shape was more curved and deeper than the North American sample. We did not observe any positivity offset, but there was negativity bias. The main difference in these samples seemed to be coming from the relatively low arousing positive and negative pictures, with the Indian sample rating the low arousing negative pictures as slightly more unpleasant than low arousing positive pictures as pleasant. One of the critical reasons for divergences in ratings could be cultural norms against sex. In India, the expression of sex, sexual desire, and sexuality is considered counterproductive to maintaining harmonious interpersonal relationships, and this censorship often causes individuals to suppress their desires and express positive affect with lower intensity. Even violent and gory pictures are neither glamorized nor freely exhibited for public audience. Importantly, semantic and conceptual interpretations of arousal vary between populations and languages, which could be the reason for the divergences. In conclusion, this study provides a pool of erotic and gory stimuli for better control and manipulation in emotion-oriented research in India. One must observe caution in arousal and dominance dimensions when using IF pictures in their studies. Thus, this study strongly suggests the use of country-specific normative ratings.
Thank you, Surabhi. And we request all the presenters to be available between 5:30 to 6 p.m. for question answer session. Next, we have a presentation on neurocognition and COVID-19, the identification of neurocognitive patterns in patients with and without anosmia by Madhumita Mahali.
Hi everyone, I'm Madhumita Mahali, and my topic is based on the neuropsychological consequences of coronavirus disease, especially identifying the neurocognitive patterns in COVID patients with and without anosmia. One of the key concerns of the ongoing pandemic are understanding the nature of its long-term neurological and cognitive complications. Anosmia is a condition in which there is a complete loss of smell, while dysgeusia refers to complete loss of taste. Both these conditions, as early onset symptoms in virus positive patients, may prove to be highly relevant and crucial for pre-symptomatic COVID-19 detection from a public health perspective. To date, it is unknown what specific neurocognitive symptoms are associated with anosmia, either acutely or chronically. Thus, the rationale of the study is to assess the neurocognitive symptoms and patterns associated with anosmia in recovered COVID-19 patients. Prior relevant literature also indicates the neurological problems associated with long COVID, which is described in the left corner of this poster. Medical research suggests that COVID-19 penetrates the brain via the olfactory route, resulting in a rapid penetration to the brain with extensive tissue damage, as well as a series of attained inflammatory cascade accompanied with various neurological complications, as illustrated in the figure. The second figure on the top shows the neurological consequences of COVID-19 virus as it crosses the blood-brain barrier, attacking the macrophage immunological cells, leading to the sudden aggressive response with the release of a large amount of pro-inflammatory cytokines, resulting in what is popularly known as cytokine storm, affecting different physiological systems in the human body. Further, it also affects the intertemporal cortical areas of the brain responsible for neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's in older population. Moving on to the methodology, the study recruits recovered COVID-19 patients from the IIT Gandhinagar community to examine their neurocognitive manifestations post-COVID infection. The inclusion and exclusion criteria are mentioned here. In order to control possible confounding factors, the participants first answer demographic questions regarding their age, gender, education level, medical conditions, and health status. Next, they take a smell test, and based on the results, are categorized in three groups. 1. Recovered COVID-19 patients who still exhibit the loss of sense of smell. 2. Recovered patients who have regained their sense of smell after COVID-19 infection, and compare the patterns of these two groups with healthy controls who never had COVID-19 nor anosmia, followed by conducting 3 neurocognitive laboratory measures as shown in the right. The neurocognitive scale is created directly from the criteria in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders that are a group of cognitive impairments that are associated with 5 major domains as listed below. The findings of the present study help in identifying whether the presence of anosmia and its duration have a differential neurocognitive impact. Further, the findings should also be helpful in developing cognitive interventions for the patterns of neurocognitive dysfunctions that arise in the affected population. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Madhumita. And now we have a presentation on quercetin elevated rotenone-induced neuroinflammation, memory, and cognitive alteration in Swiss albino mice by Dr. Julie Jain.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Julie Jain, going to present a poster entitled Quercetin Elevated Rotenone-Induced Neuroinflammation, Memory, and Cognitive Alteration in Swiss albino mice. Rotenone is a naturally occurring organic pesticide. It is a well-known inhibitor of mitochondrial complex first of electron transport chain, thereby inducing oxidative stress and used to induce Parkinson's disease model. Quercetin represents the most abundant bioflavonoid, exhibit relatively high availability in comparison to other phytochemicals. They have been possess various pharmacological properties, including anti-inflammatory, anti-tumor, antioxidant abilities. Among the other antioxidants like vitamin E and vitamin C, quercetin is found to be more potent. Neuroinflammation, inflammatory response within the brain occurs through the variety of reasons such as toxic, anxiety, depression, and obesity. Astrocytes are the star-shaped glial cells which support the blood-brain barrier and provide nutrition to neuron and repair neuronal tissue from injury. Reactive astrocytes are strongly induced by central nervous system injury and disease, and this is secret pro-inflammatory cytokine which leads to neuronal death. From the above knowledge, the objective for the present study was to investigate the role of quercetin in rotenone-induced behavior alteration, including depression, anxiety, memory, and motor activity. And second objective was to investigate the anti-inflammatory activity of quercetin against rotenone-induced neuroinflammation in the brain. The methodology used were in this study, adult male mice, Swiss albino mice, acclimatized for 2 weeks, divided into 3 equal groups. Controls group 1 serve as a control, group 2 serve as a rotenone treated group at the dose of 5 mg per kg body weight, and group 3 served as a rotenone and quercetin treated group. Rotenone 5 mg per kg body weight and quercetin 30 mg per kg body weight through orally for 60 days. After the last day of treatment, behavioral examination were performed and isolated brain and reactive astrocyte, dopaminergic neuron degeneration, pyramidal neuron degeneration were assessed. After the experiment, we found this result. In the force swim test, we found that the total immobility time is increased significantly in rotenone treated mice as compared to control group, and it significantly decreased when co-treated with quercetin. Weightlifting time decreased significantly in rotenone treated mice as compared to control group, and it increased significantly when co-treated with quercetin. The result of T-maze and Y-maze tests revealed that the percent alteration in T-maze tests decreased significantly in rotenone treated mice as compared to control group, and it increased significantly when co-treated with quercetin. In Y-maze tests, the spontaneous alteration percentage decreased significantly in rotenone treated mice as compared to control group, and it increased significantly when co-treated with quercetin. In the novel object recognition test, the exploration time percentage decreased significantly in rotenone treated mice as compared to control group, and it increased significantly when co-treated with quercetin. In the substantia nigra, the reactive astrocyte is increased significantly in rotenone treated mice as compared to control group, and it decreased significantly when co-treated with quercetin. In the hippocampus also, the reactive astrocyte increased significantly in rotenone treated mice as compared to control group, and it decreased significantly when co-treated with quercetin. In the striatum, the rotenone treated mice, the dopaminergic fiber loss decreased significantly as compared to control group, and it increased significantly when co-treated with quercetin. In the hippocampus, the pyramidal thickness of pyramidal layer decreased significantly in rotenone treated mice as compared to control group, and it increased significantly when co-treated with quercetin, suggesting that the quercetin has protective role against rotenone-induced neuroinflammation and behavioral alteration. Future direction from the study: quercetin could be used in the development of therapeutic approach for the treatment of Parkinson's disease-like disorder by targeting particular signaling pathways such as NRF2-HO1 to reduce oxidative stress injury and neuroinflammation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Julie Jain. And now we have a presentation on impairments in navigational search strategy, switching during early stages of disease pathogenesis in a mouse model of Alzheimer's disease by Smita Karunakara.
Hello, everyone. It has been reported that familial Alzheimer's disease patients develop subtle cognitive deficits 25 years before they develop dementia. Therefore, in this work, we try to identify the mild behavioral deficits that can be seen before amyloid plaque deposition in APP-PS1 mouse model of Alzheimer's disease. We use the hippocampus-dependent Morris-Watermaze spatial learning paradigm for the study. We chose this animal model because amyloid plaque deposition in the brain occurs in this model from 4 months of age onward, and we conducted our studies in 2-month-old animals when they have no amyloid plaques in the brain. As reported earlier, we noticed that both wild-type and APP-PS1 mice exhibited significant preference for the target quadrant in the probe trial. However, upon detailed analysis, we noticed that APP-PS1 mice made more errors in finding the hidden platform during initial days of training, but with repeated trials, they performed at a level comparable to the wild-type mice. We further observed that the wild-type mice preferred non-spatial strategies during initial days of training and direct spatial strategies during later days. However, the APP-PS1 mice began with an increased preference for circling strategy, which is highly non-spatial in nature and highly unpredictable too, followed by an abrupt switch to direct search strategies, avoiding local search strategies such as scanning and chaining. We further noticed that APP-PS1 mice repeated the use of same search strategy in at least 3 consecutive trials called strategy blocks. So this might have led to unsuccessful trials during early days of training, as I mentioned earlier. So to conclude, APPPS1 mice exhibit an over-dependence on non-spatial search strategies over spatial search strategies to find the platform, leading to distorted learning transitions. We observed significant differences in strategy preferences in male but not female APPPS1 mice, which was very interesting. Evaluating escape latency alone will be too limiting to identify subtle deficits during early stages of disease pathogenesis in AD mouse model. This is an important point which I would like to convey. Therefore, existing behavioral methodologies needs to be reevaluated based on our current understanding of AD progression and pathogenesis. I would like to especially thank Center for Brain Research for the funding and Central Animal Facility IASC for the infrastructure they provided to conduct my animal behavior experiments. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Smita Karunakaran. The next talk is effect of multi-talker noise at different SNRs on listening effort among individuals with noise-induced hearing loss by Dr. Hemant Shetty.
My topic of presentation is effect of multi-talker noise at different SNR on listening effort among individuals with noise-induced hearing loss. We know damage to cochlea and auditory nerve leads to sensory neural hearing loss, which is permanent damage. Out of other causes, noise-induced hearing loss is the second most common cause for sensory neural hearing loss. In sensory neural hearing loss, temporal processing is often affected, especially in those who are exposed to noise. Now we will see what is temporal processing and why it is important. Temporal processing is the time taken to recognize the differences in speech sounds, say for example, mat and pat. For understanding speech, temporal processing is an important cue. In case of sensory neural hearing loss, patients takes more time to recognize the subtle differences in speech sounds. Temporal processing impairment in them may have a negative impact on the location of cognitive resource to understand speech. This is because their attention is preoccupied in mining what is being heard with the available cognitive resources, as attention is being simultaneously utilized in rehearsal, putting sounds into short-term memory and later recalling it for speech understanding. Now, the question arises is, do the individuals who are exposed to occupational noise find effort in listening than compared to the individual who are not exposed to noise when age and hearing thresholds are matched? It is hypothesized that exposure to noise for a prolonged period significantly affects listening effort. Coming to the objective, to compare the listening effort in individual with NIHL and individual with hearing loss having no significant history of noise exposure. Coming to the method, we have used a repeated measure research design. 40 participants were included and they were grouped into 20 in each group. All are native speakers of Kannada. Both groups had bilateral mild sensory neural hearing loss. They are age matched, and individual in clinical group are exposed to 85 dBA noise over a period of 20 years with a work duration of 8 hours in a day, and they have not used a ear protective device. We have used two tests, that is a gap detection test and listening effort. In a gap detection test, a series of noise bursts are presented sequentially. In one of the noise bursts, a gap was inserted, and this gap was randomly presented in either of these two gaps. The smallest gap detection the patient identifies will be termed as the gap detection threshold. In coming to the listening effort, it comprises of two tasks, that is primary task and the secondary task. In the primary task, the patients were asked to repeat the last word of a sentence, whereas in secondary task, the patient has to recognize all the words that are repeated in the primary task soon after hearing the beep sound. In coming to the scoring part, we have separately scored the listening score and recall score, and as well the gap detection threshold 2 from each group. For each response, a score of 1 was awarded. For incorrect response, a score of 0 was assigned. The maximum score yielded in each recognition and recall score is 40, and it is converted into percentage. Coming to the results and discussion, the gap detection threshold is higher in noise-induced hearing loss than the hearing loss group, which was found significant. It indicates that the temporal processing impairment is evident in both the group, but it is more pronounced in NIHL group. Now, you will see results of listening effort. On the left-hand side, you can see that the repeat score is significantly reduced in all these three SNRs compared to the control group. A similar result is also seen in the recall score, where the clinical group scored less in recalling the word than compared to the control group. This is because the cognitive capacity allocates the maximum resource to extract the last word of a sentence in noise due to temporal impairment in the clinical group. The remaining limited resource are used to rehearse, put it into a short memory, and then recall the repeated sounds. Further, the relationship between the primary and the secondary task were seen. You can clearly see that the recall score is plotted on the y-axis and the repeat score is plotted on x-axis. As the repetition scores reduces, even the recall scores is also reduces, which is seen in both the group, but in clinical group, the effect is more. It indicates that the recall score reduces with decrease in recognition score. This is because a cochlear distortion due to hearing loss in the clinical group plus the temporal processing impairment owing to noise exposure taxes the maximum cognitive capacity to allocate the resource. Coming to the conclusion, the temporal processing impairment in individuals who are exposed to noise impacts the listening effort compared to individuals with hearing loss alone. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hemant. The next poster is on a review on Icarin, a promising perspective for future application in Parkinson's disease by Jyoti Raghav.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Jyoti Raghav from GLA University, Mathura. The title of my presentation is A Review on Icarin, a promising perspective for future application in Parkinson's disease. The objective to design this presentation is to give a brief overview about the neuroprotective effect of Icarin in Parkinson's disease. Since Parkinson's disease, as we all know, is a neurodegenerative disease in which alpha-synuclein and Lewy body formation takes place, which affects the motor skill and cognitive performances of the patient. A number of compounds have already been proposed as possible therapies, and levodopa remains the gold standard effective therapy, but still its long-term use can lead to several complications. Currently, there is no cure available for Parkinson's, and there are about 6 million of Parkinson's patients around the world. With such a large number of patients and no permanent cure, exploring for a new compound with better therapeutic benefits is the focus of many current investigations. And here comes the role of Icarin. Icarin is basically a flavonoid that has been extracted from Epimedium sagacitum, which is a traditional Chinese herb. This drug has already been well known to exert antioxidant and anti-neuroinflammatory effects. Some of the recent studies have suggested that it exerts neuroprotective effects through various pathways that have been listed here in the results section, if you can see. For example, the NRF2 signaling pathway action in the glial cell, or by suppressing the COX2 production in the hippocampal region. The different mechanism pathway of Icarin have also been shown here in the diagram. You can have a look. This compound has also exhibited significant reduction in the neurotoxicity when it was co-administered with drug rotenone. So finally, I would like to end by emphasizing the main idea that Icarin could be an adjuvant therapy to enhance the levodopa efficacy and other drugs. Therefore, this drug must be taken under consideration, and these combination treatments needs to be carefully examined and validated in other Parkinson animal models. Thank you all for taking out time to listen to my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Jyoti Raghav. The next presenter is Mr. Pradosh Kamaldas. The topic is Development in a Homosexual's Experiences, Childhood Encounters of Gay Individuals.
Hello, everyone. I'm Pratosh Kamaldas from Christ University, Bangalore. So this presentation is actually a fragment of my study conducted as part of master's thesis with the course of clinical psychology from Christ. The study entitled Development in a Homosexual's Experiences, Childhood Encounters of Gay Individuals. It tried to enlist a holistic picture of the developmental phase experiences of gay individuals. But since there were certain cognitive aspects too that I found while writing the results section of this study, I intend to take this opportunity to present this paper in this conference. So our mind, as we all know, is not a compartmental store as proposed by some of the information processing models. It is basically a storyteller. The experiences of our childhood and adolescence kind of form the baseline for formation of our permanent memory. That's how it actually works. So this research also tried to highlight 10 such stories collected from gay individuals above 18 years of age from the state of Maharashtra in India. So for this was the basic data collection procedure using a semi-structured interview methodology and a proper informed consent from the participants. These experiences of the subjects were recorded. The interviews typically lasted for around 45 to 60 minutes for each participant. And the analysis of the data depicted that for most of these participants, exploration of their sexual preferences started well during the onset of puberty. However, up till that time, they would have lived up a fake life, a life that was directed and controlled by their family, peers, and other social agencies. The expression of homosexuality involved talking, having conversations, and discussions with their family, peers, and other close individuals. Although it had some of the positive manifestations like building of self-confidence, autonomy, and boost of pride and self-esteem among the individuals. However, there were many more negative manifestations of these bold expressions as well, like feelings of hopelessness, rejection, worthlessness, and sometimes even depressive kind of feelings also generated as a kind of negative manifestations of such expressions. And another important cognitive element that construct that I could find from this study was the closeted mindset and the self-imposed barriers that I could witness in most of the participants' experiences. Now, these experiences evolve as a result of a reaction of people in the person's work and home environment. For instance, one of the subjects claimed to be scolded and rejected by most of his relatives for his excessive girlish nature. Certain instances of work-life challenges as well as dual challenges between work and personal life were also recorded. These kind of instances pushes them into their personal safe corners, which I would like to call the subjective closet. This involves their personal experiences, feelings, and desires repressed over time due to societal pressures imposed upon them. Many subjects also laid emphasis upon the social environment, claiming it to be a major contributor towards rejection of homosexuality. They assert that the lack of supportive environment and open-minded attitudes from others led to the struggles of gay men in our society. This thus becomes their objective closet now, which also involve important roles of major social agencies like the media, queer pride organizations, and other such social groups. Differences about these groups and organizations were also expressed by some of the participants by claiming that some say that they work only for rich and elite class of people. Some even said that there were certain hidden political agendas and so on. However, the most disturbing scenario that I noticed for the participants seemed to occur when there is a lack of support from members of their own community. In such instances, they face criticisms for coming out and expressing themselves. These criticisms were actually from people who were from their own community, and they were actually fearful of being exposed in front of the world. These fears instill hatred and rejection among each other, invite solicited violence, and sometimes even led to depletion of self-esteem and confidence among each other individuals. These factors and conflicts within themselves together became their collective closet, a battle that they have to fight within as well as among themselves. This is why most people, even after coming out to the world, are fully satisfied with their lives. Thus, it is evident from the results of this study that when it comes to the discovery of sexuality or sexual orientation by the gay people, the awakening of emotional and sexual attraction to people of the same sex still arises during childhood, although in the midst of an identity crisis. Failure to comply with such standards leads to emergence of atypical behavior for a boy, which is indicative of homosexuality caused by mixed feelings, especially when there is a lack of family and societal support for discussion of such issues. Lastly, from a cognitive point of view, the negative mental constructs and self-imposed barriers would be one of the most important factors for the subject's challenging and maladaptive lifestyles. Thank you.
Thank you, Pratosh. And the last presentation for today's session is Development of Cognitive Retraining Module for Improving Cognitive Deficits of Abstinent Patients with Alcohol Dependency Syndrome, Cannabis Dependency Syndrome, and Opioid Dependency Syndrome in a Tertiary Care De-Addiction Center of Northern India by Dr. Abhishek Banga.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here to present development of cognitive retraining module for improving cognitive deficits of abstinent patients with alcohol, cannabis, and opioid dependence syndrome in a tertiary care de-addiction center of Northern India. Substance use comes into play on a continuum with 3 levels: use, abuse, and dependence. Dependence causes cognitive deficits in many patients. Present study is an attempt to develop a suitable cognitive retraining module to improve cognitive deficits in persons with alcohol, cannabis, and opioid dependence syndrome. To establish efficacy of this module. Objectives: to see and compare cognitive deficits among alcohol, cannabis, and opioid dependence. To develop a module of cognitive retraining for individuals undiagnosed with alcohol, cannabis, and opioid dependence syndrome. To evaluate outcome in individuals diagnosed with ADS, CDS, and ODS using cognitive retraining intervention. Our purpose is sample of 137 male participants in the age range of 20 to 50 years fulfilling inclusion and exclusion criteria was selected from NDDTC AIMS. Pre-post study design was used in following neuropsychological tests were employed to see the cognitive deficits. These tests were used at pre and post intervention level. For attention, we used digit repetition test, a random letter test, digit vigilance test. For memory, we used PGI memory scale. For visuospatial and constructional ability, we used Coase block design test. For executive functioning, NBAT task, animal name test, and WCST were used. Total 6 sessions were delivered in each one session in 2 weeks. Session duration 45 minutes to 1 hour. Cognitive retraining module was developed by using several electronic databases in terms of cognitive retraining in terms of psychiatric conditions, neurological conditions, and substance dependence. And finally, module was prepared while taking into consideration the common cognitive deficits in individuals with substance dependence. Results: in alcohol group, significant improvement was seen on digit span, retention, and recognition of PGI memory scale. At post level, digit vigilance time and vigilance error were significantly different. In NBAT test, animal test, and Coase block test, there was significant improvement at post level. In cannabis and opioid group, also at post intervention level, significant improvement was seen on several items of PGI memory scale, digit, vigilance, NBAC, animal test, and Coase block test. Conclusion: only 3 domains in PGI memory test, namely digit span, retention for dissimilar pairings, and recognition, was observed to change significantly at the pre and post levels. Except for persevetive error, T-score, and non-persevetive S-score, all other domains in digit vigilance, WCST, Coase block design test, NBAC, and animal test were found to be significantly different. Findings of this study suggest that the cognitive retraining intervention helps in improving several cognitive functions in all the 3 groups. However, the maximum impact of this module was seen on cannabis and opioid groups. This study was funded by Department of Science and Technology, and we are thankful that DST given us the grant for conducting this research.
Thank you everyone for your wonderful presentations. We will have a question answer session between 5:30 to 6 p.m. where we request all the presenters to be online. Now over to Mahima.
That was really an extraordinary session. Thank you, Mr. Chaitanya and Ms. Aarti, for chairing the session. My sincere appreciation to every single presenter of the poster session. Each one was very informative and well presented.